Let's talk here with Stephen Conroy, the former Communications Minister, Gary Hardgrave, who you can see here on Friday nights, the delightful Caroline Marcus. So, look, it's an economic firm who turns around and suggests that Channel 2 and SBS should merge because we're in this era now of streaming, the ability to essentially have the niche offering that is ethnically focused broadcasting could essentially be done by a part of Channel 2 rather than in and of itself. Now, Stephen, how do you feel about this? Because, look, I think we all know how this works, which is it ain't ever going to happen, despite the fact that rationalisation, there's a reasonable financial argument for it. I can also put forward some sort of distortion of the market issues here. But is this one of those things that a whole bunch of Liberals put up on their Facebook pages and go, ha, 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 but will never actually happen?
Look, as the Minister at the time, it was one of those things that always on the desk or in the top drawer of the desk of usually the head of the ABC. So they talked to me about it at the time. The claimed synergies, cost savings, I was a little dubious on. And at the end of the day, I could not see an overall benefit in terms of the actual merger proposal. It wouldn't have changed the number of channels, which is one of the things you have complained about. I don't accept your argument on there. The ABC provides a valuable public service. Well, we're going to really strongly disagree there, Paul.
We'll get to this in a second. I'm most surprised because I think we're about to say goodbye to Win in a sec, right? But just before we say goodbye to Win here, right? Or we're out of time now? OK, cool. I need a countdown occasionally. All right, see you later if you're watching us on Win. We'll see you again tomorrow night. Maybe they're all just trying to work out the Commodore 64 backstage. We had such a great night last night. I'm excited about beating Wentworth. We won't beat Peppa Pig tomorrow. When the numbers come out.
Dave Sharma in it, hasn't it?
That's how it works. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Now, Stephen, see, here's my point, right? I completely agree with all of the important service aspect of it. The whole point to me about public broadcasting is that, yes, of course, it should fill the void that commercial operators don't. So, say, rather than ABC Radio in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane being able to call AFL football or NRL football, both of those things are heavily covered by commercial organisations. But I would expect that the taxpayer-funded broadcaster in the ABC to call either the next tier down, the women's football, another sport that needs the attention that comes with it. That's the concept about the service, because as we all know, you can stream Triple M football if you're living in regional Victoria or in the Northern Territory. You want to listen to our mate Dan Ganane calling rugby league in Sydney. That's the way things work these days. But I want to tell you this. As I said before, right, I'm not suggesting selling Channel 2 and any of that crap, right? But I'm just talking about how distorted the market is. The ABC has 7 television stations in every capital city. 7. They have 13 radio stations in every capital city. We're not talking about what's being offered in Broken Hill here. I'm talking about Melbourne. SBS has 12 television stations in the market. The truth is that I agree with the philosophical thing about what public broadcasting does. But Paul Keating was smart, deregulated the banks. They sold off Qantas. They sold off Telstra. We don't own these institutions anymore. So why does the government own an institution that has 13 radio stations in the commercial market of Sydney or Melbourne, where if I was a private company, I can only own 2?
Well, look, I think you've got both a technological issue there, which I'm going to disagree with you over. What actually happened was multi-channelling came along. Technology improved the ability to broadcast within the same pieces of spectrum. So whether they used to just have one channel, or they've now got 12 channels, is not actually the issue. The issue is they've received no more spectrum. And I used to be in charge of the spectrum auctions as well as in charge of the ABC in the broadest macro sense. So the ABC haven't suddenly reached out and grabbed all this new space to block out all the others. Like TV stations, like radio stations, they've simply applied the new technology within their existing allocation. So it is a complete furphy to say, because they've suddenly got 12. They're actually now more fulfilling their charter, and they actually have a legal charter passed by Parliament that directs them to cover certain things. On the sports coverage, Now, I do think there's been moments when they have probably jumped into some markets where they possibly couldn't have. But I can't agree with you on a technology basis about, you can just stream across the whole state. Not everywhere can get good broadband connections. I don't know, I don't want to break your heart on this, Paul, but radio waves coming off radio antennas are much easier to pick up than broadband across the broadband waves. It's just the laws of physics issue.
Yeah, nothing with satellite broadband.
So if you want to make sure the state of origin, if you want to make sure the rugby league, the main ones, are able to be picked up and heard in every nook and cranny, or almost as many as you can, you actually do need to have the statewide service that the ABC offers.
Sure. Okay, but here's my thing. I mean, I talked about
streaming one day may replace that.
But see,
so you are right to point to it, but we are nowhere near that yet.
No, but here's the thing, right? So this is what's always frustrating about this conversation, right? The idea of SBS and ABC merging, in that, with all of those multi-channels, should one of those multi-channels be the ethnic-based one? Should one of those multi-channels be, rather than showing Jimmy Fallon, like they do on their, paying an American TV station to retransmit late-night comedy from NBC, is that the channel that should be NITV? That's the conversation we're talking about. Instead, no, it's got to be and that's my point about this here. But Caroline, again, this conversation, which starts off about a rationalisation of resources, ends in the pitch battle of the right to exist. I am not suggesting they do not have the right to exist. I am not suggesting the funding should be cut. I am simply saying technology has now got to a point when you don't need two separate antennas to do the same freaking job.
No, you're not saying that, get rid of the ABC or privatise the ABC, although that's, of course, what some critics are going to take from this argument, because any time you say anything about the ABC, that's what it becomes. Oh, no, save our ABC. But, look, I think there is an economic argument to merging ABC and SBS. It would save some money in taxpayer funding, and it's bloated. It's $1.3 billion a year that they get combined. Yep. So I think that you could mount an economic argument for doing that. But let's face it, it's because they're facing the same sort of pressures that all commercial outlets are facing at the moment from streaming services like Netflix, like Stan, and they shouldn't be immune from the threats that the rest of us have to face as well when they act like a commercial entity.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, is that you've got the sanctimony of some of their news and commentary programs, which sort of bleeds into this whole conversation about how the whole service should exist. But I think it's this thing, Gary, where, I'm frustrated that the government doesn't own a bank anymore. And this was one of the great economic things that happened was the government's got out of banks. One of the best things that ever happened for aviation was government's got out of aviation. You say government gets out of broadcasting and the people set their freaking hair on fire.
Yeah, well, Paul, for 5 3/4 years I was the Secretary of the Government's Communications Policy Committee. I wasn't the Minister for Communications like Stephen was, but I was very intimately involved in the discussion around digital, around the allocation of spectrum, and I understand very clearly what occurred back in the days when Dick Alston was the minister, and a terrific minister he was. Mitch Fifield was an advisor, and he's just finished as communications minister, so, it gives you an idea of the sort of heritage I've got on this. The ABC were gifted, the SBS were gifted the same amount of spectrum that commercial channels were gifted at the time, which was to allow them to move from analogue to digital. All of that then opened up the opportunity for everyone to have 4 and 5 channels, all these sort of multi-channels that 9 and 7 and 10 program. The ABC and SBS, though, run out of content, so they rely heavily on Al Jazeera and the cast-offs from American networks and all this sort of stuff. They run reruns of reruns of reruns. Look, Paul, it's all about means of distribution and content. Creating content that's necessary for people to enjoy. The ABC basically have run out of content. Now, they do this at a very expensive rate, and Caroline is right. I mean, they just keep coming back for more subsidy. There's no recognition of the commercial reality that every commercial television network needs to do. Now, let me tell you about radio, mate. I mean, that's my first love. I started involved in radio back about 1975. Radio's been the lab rat of media policy ever since Paul Keating said the princes of print and the queens of screen, that whole great media reform in the mid-'80s. Now, I just simply make the point to you that there are so many valuable radio station licences absorbed by the ABC rebroadcasting the same content. None of it's local. Well, some of it is, but not much of it. Most of it's rebroadcast from somewhere else. And they hog all this spectrum. If the ABC was brought back to the same footing as commercial radio and commercial television in each of the capital city markets, that excess spectrum was sold off, you wouldn't need to fund the ABC for a decade. And you cannot possibly have the ABC and SBS merge while the SBS is a far more, like 10% of the ABC budget, efficient organisation. The ABC,
you're going to give me a go at the end of this.
The ABC doesn't have the ABC. Oh, look, Stephen. You know, look, you can do your defence of the ABC, but they are a bloated organisation that does not have any commercial reality associated with anything. There's no struggle to earn a dollar. There's no understanding about where that dollar comes from. They simply mount up political campaigns, and you're about to mount one up for them to try and get more money out of the Canberra taxpayer, each and every one of us. The ABC, if it started to use commercial principles, Paul, like even taking ads, I don't want to take ads away from Sky, but plenty of advertisers would like to be on it. Let's put them on a subscription service and test the market, see how viable they really are, I reckon.
Stephen, I'll give you 90 seconds because officially Australia is bored right now.
I need 10 minutes. The reason there are no more commercial radio licences in the capital cities is very simple. The commercial radio stations lobby government heavily. Don't you dare issue another commercial radio broadcast licence. That's the fact. The ABC argument is drivel.
Well, so what? Of course they don't want any. They don't want any more commercial licences. The radio's been the lab rat. It's been killed by government.
They would go berserk. The commercial radio stations.
Yeah, that's been killed. Commercial radio's been killed by government decisions.
It's got nothing to do with the ABC. Nothing to do with the ABC.
All right.
Well,
Paul,
you've not conveniently not listened to what I said, Stephen. You've conveniently not listened to what I said.
You said sell off the spectrum.
No, you didn't.
To who?
No.
A new competitor for the commercial radio station.
You're doing an elbow.
That's exactly
You're doing an elbow.
You're just being embarrassed by
an elbow, and we're going to give Elbow the elbow, mate. That's the next campaign. We'll give Elbow the elbow. It's real simple,
gentlemen,
mate.
I'm doing the Frank Underwood thing with the ring. We're done.